Hello whiskey folk, friends, appreciators, casual sippers, however you'd label yourself, welcome to yet another Whiskey Geek review. Comparison, side by side, enigma, whatever this is, welcome. Now today what I'm reviewing are these two whiskies from the Smokehead range by Ian McLeod's, the Extra Rare and the Sherry Bomb. They are independently bottled by Ian McLeod's from undisclosed distilleries on Islay. So I bought these about a year ago before we went and visited Islay and toured all the distilleries. But initially there were a few red flags for me, a few things that were putting me off trying the whiskies, but that in itself was reason for me to push myself out of my comfort zone and give them a try. Firstly, all of the packaging, the name itself even, the brand Smokehead, it's auto-suggestion, it's coated in all of these little tasting notes, all of these words to kind of set you up for expecting something of the whiskey. I don't like that because I find it gets in the way, it kind of clutters up your own appreciation of a whiskey. If you can come to it clean and not have any expectations, you tend to find something a little bit more exciting and personal than just coming to this saying, I'm going to find smoke, I'm going to find smoke and sherry. Next, this one is bottled at 40%. I find that to be, generally speaking, a bit of a turn off because I find it too restrained. It's not very forthcoming with flavour or excitement. This one's a bit better, the Sherry Bomb at 48%, but the Extra Rare is just 40%. Then there's the fact that these are released without the distillery name on them. What is the motivation behind that? Now, it could just be that Ian McLeod's wants a slice of that pie, they want to get in on the Islay name, or it could be one of the established distilleries on Islay, one of those brands, don't want to hurt their own brand name by releasing this stock under their name. That's a bit of a pessimistic point of view, but I've seen it before and I'm always a little bit cautious over it. Then finally, there is the approach that's been used to kind of using Islay as a marketing tool. You know, all of the talk of terroir and regions and all of that that's going on at the moment, it just seems somewhat abusive to say, this is an Islay and therefore you should buy it. It's not establishing itself based on its own merit, it's trying to piggyback and use Islay as a marketing, as a brand itself. And I object to that just on principle, I guess. So despite there being all of these red flags, all of these things to put me off, I decided, or possibly because of all of these red flags, I decided I'd pick them up and I'd give them a go. This was before we went to Islay. I wanted to settle into them, take them with me to Islay, try and build my own impression, and then as I was exploring the island, as I was exploring the distilleries, try and figure out where they might be from, where they settle best. Now there is of course something to be said for the enjoyment of trying to explore and figure out what distillery it's from yourself. There was this little sample that I got from a Douglas Lang bottling, again an undisclosed Islay, and just sat there exploring and doing comparisons with other core expressions was a load of great fun. So that was a big draw for me. The other thing which reassured me to a decent extent, this has been bottled by Ian McLeod's. Ian McLeod owned Glengoyne and Tamdhu, both distilleries that I respect, and they produce whiskey that I enjoy. So if their core values as a company are being carried over to this brand, it should be decent whiskey. There's reassurance there for me anyway. So the first one that I'm going to broach, the first one I'm looking at is this, the Smokehead Extra Rare. The Extra Rare is supposed to be a travel retail exclusive. It's in 1 litre bottles, 40% ABV, and it's a no age statement. That being said, I found this for just under £40 I think on Amazon, so you can source it elsewhere. So going in and taking a look at this colour here, it's about a shade 4 or Suave, and it's also interesting to note that the legs, the body of it is fairly thin. There's very little legs forming, and when they do form they're quite thin and quick running. Now exploring this nose, you're getting quite a briny, salty experience. It's sweet seaweed, almost honeyed. There's some pineapple and other citrus fruits in there. But it ties in with kind of a softer medicinal tone. And again, this smoke, but it's a softer smoke, quite meaty, almost greasy bacon crisps. And there's quite some spirit characteristic evident. It's sprightly, youthful, and with a bit of a solvency prickle. But altogether, the nose it's interesting how inviting it is. You know, as an Islay whiskey, this is actually quite soft and welcoming. Moving that through to the palate. It's quite thin initially before the smoke kicks in. And then there's this sugary sweetness. Briny again, and vegetal. It's almost like olives, you know, the olive brine and that kind of thing. Quite savoury all in all. There's kind of smoked and salty kippers, that kind of thing. Touch of wood, but it's a citrusy wood. It's kind of orangey and a bit oaky. A touch of pepper kind of kicks in, and there's something quite youthful and fresh to it. It could be that citrus or the solventy tone again. That pepper carries through into the finish, and it's kind of got some capsicum heat to it, but it's mostly dry and woody, a little bit bitter, but still very soft. It's not got a lot of the sugars or the citrus carrying through particularly well. There's some flat cereals as well. It definitely tapers out. The nose is its strongest point. The palate is okay, but it's a step down, and again the finish is a step down, so it kind of tails off. So for me, this one is certainly enjoyable, but it's nothing special. I've rated it a 78 out of 100. I'm not sure what qualifies it as extra rare. It's lacking that excitement for me. The nose boasts some intricacies and some depth that the palate and the finish just don't carry through. So it gets disappointing as it goes. Contrast to that, the bottle has evolved nicely as it's gone down. It started off and it was quite closed up, and it's opened, and all this meaty and the briny and the savouriness has come out, which I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed having a litre of it because it's developed the way it has. I've used this one as an intro to Islay with quite a bit of success because it is very accessible, it's soft, it's enjoyable, while still having a lot of smoky girth and some medicinal tones and brininess to explore. It's gone across well to people who don't typically like Islay, so that is a massive boon to me. It's something that's great to have in your counter, in your collection, to try and introduce people and draw them along. But for me, it's not amazing. So next up is the Sherry Bomb. This is the Smokehead Sherry Bomb. 48%, 70 centilitres. Again, I picked this one up alongside that on Amazon, just shy of £40. Now, they don't give, and this is a criticism really, they don't give any substantial, any real information. It's another no age statement. You don't know whether it's been chill filtered or coloured, but it being Ian McLeod's, it's not really within their portfolio to actually do that, so I hope it's not been. And the other thing is, all they really give us about why it's a sherry bomb is selling us it's boldly blasted by Oloroso sherry casks. That's kind of indicative of a finish rather than any real maturation in sherry casks. It being Ian McLeod's though, they have access to a lot of good sherry casks, so it should be quality sherry influence, you'd hope. Now the colour on this one is much bolder, about a shade 14 Old Bordeaux, and again the body also, the oiliness is it's clinging much better than the 40% of the extra rare. So that in itself is a little bit promising to me. Now exploring the nose on this one is really very pleasant, really enjoyable. It's in contrast much bolder, the body, the character is much more forthcoming. At its core you've got loads of this musty, damp, dark fruit and old wood. An earthiness, a really quite nice mulchy peat element, and a whiff of smoke going along with that. I don't find this one particularly medicinal. but then you're getting much more of the sherry layers. You're getting citrus peels, marmalade, some dark chocolate, walnut, spiciness, chocolate coffee beans, all of those kind of things that you'd expect from a good sherry influence. I would say it's possibly biased slightly more towards the sherry for me, but it's relatively balanced. There is a good, again, friendly peatiness, friendly smokiness, but there's a good body to both elements. And there is an astringency, a little bit of a prickle, and some pepper, but it's not cloying. So let's see how that carries through to the palate. So you're getting quite a bit more of that pepper, the prickle coming through on the palate than you did on the nose. It's more evident. Those muddled dark fruits are still there, but there's this kind of confused chocolate bean, coffee bean, woody bitterness at its core. Rather than it being a sweet sherry, it's sherry over a bitterness. And then behind that you've got a kind of restrained earthiness and a hint of ashy smoke. So the sherry, I think, is coming through stronger influence on the palate. Behind that you've got wood influence, and then behind that you've got peat. And unfortunately that bitter, woody, kind of dull bitterness is what spikes and builds through into the finish. It's actually a tad thin on the palate, which is unfortunate and unexpected given the 48% ABV. But what carries through into the finish and is most prominent is this flat, dull, bitter woodiness. And it's front and center, it's bold, and it is honestly a little bit cloying, a little bit unpleasant. You do have some mulchy earthiness, some of that ashy smoke, a few strands of the sherry influence, but all of that tapers off quite quickly, and what you're left with is this prominent bitter woodiness. It's a real shame because the rest of it was so short and that just lingers and lingers. So unfortunately for me, the sherry bomb is a similar tale to the extra rare in that it started with so much promise and it just kind of fell away from there. I've rated this one a 76 out of 100. Given that it's a smaller bottle at a similar price point, it's a little disappointing. The nose was even more welcoming and promising than the extra rare, but it fell even further from there, so it was more of a disappointment. I think it doesn't quite live up to the Smokehead name in that the peat influence is there, but it's subdued, it's hidden, and it's subtle. There is earthiness and there's a hint of smoke, but there's nothing really that Islay-esque. I could see this being a peated Highland. And the sherry on the nose was great. If it had carried through, it would have been lovely, but it just struggled to find its footing. So as they both fell away, what was left was essentially an over-oaked whiskey, and I struggled to get excited about that. So this one for me, although I've enjoyed having the bottle, I've enjoyed working my way through it, I'm not going to be in a rush to recommend it or to buy another bottle. Now as for what distillery these whiskies have come from, when I first opened this, down to about the shoulder, the extra rare, I was fairly confident this was an Ardbeg. And to the extent where I even mentioned it to our tour guide, one of the ambassadors at Ardbeg, and for a second there was a glint in his eye. He knew exactly what I was talking about, but you couldn't quite tell whether that was, yes, I know where it's from, but I'm not telling you, or yes, it's an Ardbeg, but I'm not telling you. He seemed to know and have some familiarity with the whiskey, but he was giving me no real hints. I've found it to walk further and further away from an Ardbeg, possibly more reminiscent of a Laphroaig, but I've never had an independently bottled Laphroaig, something that hasn't been chill filtered, hasn't been coloured, but there's a great meatiness and some nice brininess. There's a lacking medicinal element to it, but a lot of the rest of the character is there. The fact that it isn't quite sitting as any one particular distillery, that could be an answer as to why it's been independently bottled rather than sold within one of their core ranges, because it doesn't fit their style. And that to me is in itself a point of interest, something that's made this whiskey worth having, worth trying. Now as for the sherry bomb, I don't think that this is necessarily from the same distillery. There are elements to this, The only thing reminiscent of an Ardbeg is the heavily sherried influence that you find in an Uigeadail. When you pull that away and you look at the peated characteristic and the solvent characteristics, this one doesn't really line up with Ardbegs that I've tried. There's something a little bit more Lagavulin-esque to this, and there is some business ties with Ian MacLeod's and Lagavulin, or Diageo rather. Maybe that makes sense. But again, for me, this doesn't fit perfectly within any particular distillery portfolio. And I can totally understand if the whiskey had taken a turn and become over-oaked, why any distillery wouldn't want to put it under their own name. So even though I've drank about 2/3 of each of these bottles now, I still don't know, I'm none the wiser. I've had my guesses and my assumptions along the way, but it doesn't quite sit right for either. That in itself has been a great source of fun for me. It's something exciting to explore and experiment with. Doing the side-by-sides with different expressions, it's added value to these whiskies for me anyway. So thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do chuck a like and a comment below, and consider subscribing for more whiskey content. Cheers!